Disposable. That was the word that shattered me. 10 years of loyalty, sweat, and blood poured into a company I helped build from the ground up, and that's all I was worth. Disposable. When my boss spat that word at me, I felt something inside me snap. It wasn't anger at first, it was disbelief. 10 years of late nights, weekends lost, birthdays missed, and family dinners I abandoned because the company always came first. 10 years of cleaning up his messes, covering his lies, making sure his empire never cracked. And now, I was nothing. He didn't even flinch when he said it. His voice was calm, almost casual, like he was tossing away an empty coffee cup. You've served your purpose. Don't take it personally. People like you're disposable. People like me. Those words echoed in my skull like a gunshot. And right then, I realized something. If I was disposable, then so was he. I'll admit something to you. I wasn't born for revenge. I was born for survival. My parents raised me in a world where the strong chewed up the weak, and the only way to matter was to prove yourself indispensable. When I joined his company, I swore I'd climb until I could finally breathe. I gave him my loyalty because I thought loyalty still meant something. It didn't. It meant nothing to him. The day he fired me, the office was buzzing like usual. Phones ringing, interns scrambling, junior managers pretending they mattered. I walked in carrying 3 binders filled with projections that would have doubled revenue in under a year. I didn't know that morning that I was already a ghost in his eyes. He didn't even let me sit down. Pack your things, he said. We're moving in a new direction. Just like that. 10 years erased. I remember staring at his desk. Polished oak, glossy enough to see my own reflection in it. That desk had been my battlefield, my altar, my curse. I'd sat across from him in that office 1,000 times, taking orders, offering solutions, saving his career with my silence. And now he looked at me like I was a stain on the carpet. Don't look so shocked, he said. You didn't think you were irreplaceable, did you? I didn't answer. If I had, I would have ripped his smug throat out right there in front of his glass walls and wide-eyed employees. Instead, I stood frozen, because something colder than rage began to rise in me. It was clarity. He thought I was disposable. Fine. But he had no idea how dangerous a disposable man could be. When I left the building, the air felt different. The world outside was moving, cars honking, people laughing, the usual chaos of the city. But I wasn't part of it anymore. I was something else. Something darker. I didn't go home. I didn't call anyone. I wandered for hours, letting the word disposable grind against my brain like broken glass. I thought about every late night, every sacrifice, every time I'd defended him when others whispered about his corruption. I thought about how I'd protected him from scandals that would have ended him, and that's when I laughed, because suddenly I realized his empire wasn't his. It was mine. Every success he claimed had been built on my back. Every deal he closed had been prepped, calculated, and polished by me. Every secret he buried, I was the one who dug the hole. Without me, he wasn't a king. He was nothing, and now I was free. You want to know the truth? Revenge doesn't start with rage. It starts with silence, with planning, with patience. I didn't storm back into his office or shout in the lobby. That's what a fool would have done. No, I walked away like a man already buried, because I knew when I came back it wouldn't be for words, it would be for blood. The first night, I opened my old laptop. It still held files from projects that never saw the light of day. Projects he buried because they threatened his vision. But those files also held proof. Proof of how much I'd built and how much he'd stolen. Proof of his lies. I scrolled through documents, contracts, financial trails, and then I found it. A single folder I'd almost forgotten. Hidden under layers of encryption, marked with one word: insurance. Inside was every secret I had ever saved for him. Every shady deal, every under-the-table bribe, every scandal he begged me to erase, and I had erased them. Publicly, but not privately. Privately, I kept them. I told myself it was to protect him. But maybe, deep down, I always knew this day would come. I smiled for the first time in weeks. He thought I was disposable. But now, I held the match that could burn down everything he'd ever built, and I was ready to strike. They say revenge is best served cold. I disagree. Revenge is best served precise. I didn't want to simply destroy him overnight. No, that would have been too merciful. He had stripped 10 years from me, one quiet betrayal at a time. My revenge had to mirror that, layer by layer, cut by cut. And so I began to plan. The first step was surveillance. Not the kind with cameras and wires. No, I already knew his habits better than anyone. The late nights he spent at the bar near the office. The mistress across town he thought nobody knew about. The way he always left his passwords scribbled in a leather-bound notebook inside his desk drawer. I had trained myself for a decade to anticipate his every move. What he never realized was that anticipation works both ways. While I had once used it to protect him, I could just as easily use it to dismantle him, piece by piece. But let me be clear, I didn't want just his career. I wanted his world to collapse. His money, his power, his reputation, his family. Everything he had ever taken for granted, I wanted to watch it rot in his hands. So I started small. I leaked a single email. Just one, an exchange between him and a supplier, discussing inflated costs and kickbacks. Nothing major, just enough to stir whispers in the boardroom. Just enough to make the shareholders uneasy. Within a week, he was already on edge. I heard from an old colleague. He'd called 3 emergency meetings, pacing the floor, barking at assistants like a rabid dog. He knew the email was real, but he didn't know who had it. That was the beauty of it. He thought his enemies were outside the walls. He never considered the ghost within, but whispers weren't enough. The second strike had to cut deeper. I went after his pride, his carefully polished image. For years, he'd paraded himself as a visionary, a self-made titan who clawed his way from nothing. But I knew the truth. I had the documents, the old contracts, the proof that his empire had been born from stolen ideas. Ideas that weren't his. Ideas that were mine. I crafted an anonymous report. Detailed, irrefutable, dripping with evidence. Then I sent it to a journalist I knew couldn't resist a scandal this juicy. The article exploded online. "CEO's success built on stolen work," the headline screamed. His smiling face was plastered everywhere. News feeds, morning shows, even the screens in the subway tunnels. People devoured the story like vultures, and I watched from the shadows as his empire began to shake. But the real blow, the one that would tear him apart, was still waiting. You see, I didn't just have his secrets. I had his sins. The mistress. The hidden accounts. The night he signed away millions in hush money to silence a lawsuit that would have destroyed him years ago. All of it tucked neatly in my insurance folder. I could have dropped it all at once. I could have annihilated him in a single headline. But where's the satisfaction in that? No, I wanted to see him unravel. I wanted to watch as he fought to hold on, only to realize every rope he grabbed was already cut. I'll never forget the first time I saw him after it all began. It was at a fundraiser, one of those events where the wealthy pretend to care about the world while sipping wine that costs more than a month's rent. He looked different, thinner, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the crowd like a hunted animal. He shook hands, smiled for cameras, but the cracks were there, and when our eyes met across the room, I swear he froze. He knew. Maybe not everything. Maybe not the details. But he knew. The man he'd called Disposable was no longer his servant. I was his shadow, and his shadow was hungry. That night, as I walked past him, I whispered just loud enough for him to hear, "Do you feel replaceable now?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. His empire was bleeding and he hadn't even seen the knife yet. The best part? Nobody suspected me. To them, I was gone. Just another discarded employee, forgotten like yesterday's trash. But in the silence of the night, when he sat alone in his glass tower, I wanted him to feel it. The paranoia, the dread, the creeping realization that the only person who had ever been truly loyal to him was the same person tearing his world apart, and I wasn't finished. Not even close. You'd think destroying a man would be quick. A single bullet, a sudden scandal, a one-time betrayal. But no, destruction is slow. It's erosion. You don't topple an empire in a day. You make its foundations rot until the walls collapse under their own weight. That's what I was doing to him, and he didn't even know how deep it went. By the third week, the company's stock price was slipping. Investors were nervous. The board was restless. And he, my great, powerful boss, was unraveling in public. Reports leaked of him screaming at executives during meetings, throwing chairs in his office, demanding names. He wanted a scapegoat, but there wasn't one, because the enemy was invisible. Me, the disposable man. I watched from afar, but sometimes watching wasn't enough. I needed to see his fear up close to taste it, so I paid a visit. Not to him directly, no, not yet. I visited his mistress. She was younger than him by 20 years, beautiful in that careless, expensive way. She thought she was untouchable, wrapped in his money and promises. But I had pictures, dozens of them. Photos of her apartment, of their meetings, of his hands on her in places that would ruin him if they ever saw daylight. I didn't threaten her. I didn't even speak his name. I just slid the envelope across her table at the cafe where she liked to sip her overpriced lattes. Her hands trembled when she opened it. She looked at me like I was a monster. And maybe I was. You have two choices, I told her softly. Disappear quietly, or stay and watch him disappear instead. She didn't say a word. But a week later, she was gone. Apartment emptied. Phone disconnected. He would never know why. Only that the one person who made him feel powerful outside the office had vanished like smoke, another crack in his armor. But the cracks weren't enough. I wanted the break. So I went for the one thing I knew he couldn't survive without: control. He thrived on the illusion that he was always 10 steps ahead, the smartest man in the room. I decided to make him doubt that, to make him feel like every step he took was being watched, predicted, manipulated. How? Simple. I left breadcrumbs. An anonymous tip here, a whispered rumor there. A note slid under his office door with a single sentence. I know what you did in 2015. That was the year of his biggest cover-up. The lawsuit he buried with money and threats. Nobody else knew the details. Nobody but me. He didn't sleep that night, I know, because I hacked into his home security feed. At 3 a.m., I watched him pacing his living room, pouring whiskey into a glass his hand could barely hold steady. The king was trembling. But fear alone wasn't the endgame. No, fear was just the appetizer. The main course was humiliation. I leaked the bribe documents next. Real money transfers, coded accounts, names of politicians on his payroll. Enough to spark a government investigation. Enough to send the press into a frenzy. The headlines screamed louder than ever. CEO under federal probe. His face was on every screen again. But this time, he wasn't a visionary. He was a criminal. And all the while, I stayed in the shadows. Silent, invisible, disposable. The day he was called to testify, I sat in the back of the courthouse. He walked in wearing his $1,000 suit, but it hung on him like rags. His hair was thinner, his skin pale, his eyes sunken with sleepless nights. And for the first time in a decade, he didn't look untouchable. He looked human, weak, afraid. He didn't see me. Of course not. Why would he look for me? In his mind, I no longer existed. But when he sat down at the witness table and adjusted the microphone, I leaned forward and whispered to myself, "Disposable men don't vanish. They return." He stumbled through his answers. The prosecutor tore him apart. Every carefully built lie crumbled under evidence I had fed them piece by piece. And by the end of the day, his empire wasn't just shaking, it was collapsing. But I wasn't satisfied yet, because I didn't just want him ruined. I wanted him destroyed in a way that would echo forever. I wanted to make him feel like I had felt. Worthless, alone, abandoned. I wanted him to beg for mercy, and then realize mercy didn't exist anymore. And that part, the final act, was still waiting. By the fourth month, he was no longer the man who had once towered over me. The man who called me disposable now looked like he belonged in the trash himself. But I wasn't finished. Not even close, because losing money, losing reputation, that was surface level. I wanted him to lose something deeper, something that couldn't be rebuilt with lawyers and publicists. I wanted him to lose himself. So I went after his family. Not directly. I wasn't interested in hurting them. They weren't guilty of his crimes. But I knew him well enough to understand that his wife and son were the only two things tethering him to what little humanity he had left. I started with his wife. A simple envelope in the mail, no return address. Inside, pictures of him with his mistress, time-stamped, undeniable. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. Within days, she filed for separation. She froze his accounts. She moved out of the mansion, taking their son with her. And suddenly, the fortress he thought was unbreakable became hollow. I imagined the look on his face when he came home to empty halls, untouched dinner plates, and silence echoing through rooms once filled with family laughter. That was a different kind of punishment. A personal one, and it was glorious. But he wasn't broken yet. No. He was angry. Furious. A wounded beast lashing out at shadows. He launched witch hunts inside the company, firing executives, accusing board members of betrayal, blaming anyone but himself. Every move he made only worsened the collapse. The stock kept sinking. Partners pulled out. The media smelled blood, and I kept feeding the fire. Another document leaked here. Another rumor whispered there. Every strike surgical, precise, perfectly timed. He was fighting a war on every front. And losing. But the most delicious part of revenge isn't watching someone fall. It's making them realize who pushed them. And so, I gave him a gift, an anonymous package. Inside, a single flash drive. No note, no explanation, just files. Thousands of them. Every incriminating detail I'd collected over the years. But one file stood out. A recording. From years ago. His voice, sharp and cold, cutting into me during one of our private meetings. People like you are disposable. Don't ever forget that. The exact words that had birthed my vengeance. I wanted him to hear them again. To know I'd never forgotten. To know that his disposable man had turned into his executioner. 2 days later, I saw him again. Not at a fundraiser, not in a courtroom, but outside his own building. He was standing on the steps, reporters swarming him, cameras flashing. He looked like a cornered rat, sweat dripping down his neck as he barked denials that no one believed anymore. And then? He looked up. He saw me across the street. I wasn't hiding. I stood there, hands in my pockets, eyes locked on his. And in that moment I saw it. The recognition. The horror. The truth. He knew. He finally knew. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stared. Because I wanted the weight of it to crush him right there in front of the world. I wanted him to realize the man he had called worthless had orchestrated his entire downfall. And judging by the way his jaw clenched, the way his face drained of color, I think he did. That night, the news reported that federal agents raided his office. His company was under full investigation. His assets were frozen. His board had voted him out as CEO. In a single evening, the empire he once ruled slipped through his fingers. And me? I sat in my small apartment, sipping cheap whiskey, watching the live coverage, with a calmness I hadn't felt in years, because I knew this was just the beginning. He'd lost his power. He'd lost his family. But I still hadn't given him the one thing he truly deserved. Humiliation so deep it would follow. Him to the grave. That part, the grand finale, was still waiting. Revenge is an art. Each stroke must be deliberate, every color chosen with care. And by now, my masterpiece was nearly complete. He had lost his company. He had lost his wife and son. He had lost the respect of the world, but he hadn't lost himself. Not yet. And that was the final piece. You see, humiliation is more powerful than ruin, Money can be regained, reputations can be rebuilt. But once a man sees himself as nothing, there is no coming back. That's where I wanted him, crawling in the dirt, choking on the taste of his own weakness. So I designed the end game. I started with whispers. A trail of rumors strategically placed that he had been embezzling money not just for the company, but for himself. That he had been gambling, that he was drowning in debt. Most of it wasn't true. But truth doesn't matter when a man is already hated. The lie becomes the truth if it's repeated loudly enough, and I repeated it. By the time the media picked it up, his name was synonymous with corruption, addiction, fraud. He was no longer just a failed CEO. He was a walking scandal, and the best part? He didn't know which sins were his and which were mine. The pressure ate at him. I could see it in every public appearance. He twitched. He snapped at reporters. He shouted at people who once worshipped him, and then he cracked. One evening, he showed up at a shareholder's house, drunk, screaming that he was being framed. The police were called. He spent the night in a cell. The story broke before dawn. The mighty king of industry, reduced to a drunk in handcuffs, and all I did was watch, smiling at the irony. But I wasn't done. The true finale required something deeper. Something personal, so I reached out, not to him, but to his son. A young man in college, barely 20, innocent, confused. I didn't approach him directly. Instead, I arranged for him to stumble across an anonymous blog post. A story about a ruthless CEO who built an empire by crushing others, who betrayed those closest to him, who destroyed his own family. The post included evidence. Real evidence. Documents, photos, recordings. Enough to make the boy see his father for what he really was. The boy shared it online. It spread like wildfire, and suddenly, the one person whose approval he had clung to was gone. His son publicly disowned him. On social media, for the world to see. That was the strike he couldn't recover from. I'll never forget the look on his face when I saw him again after that. He was sitting alone in a bar, the same bar where he used to celebrate his victories. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, his hands trembling as he nursed a drink he couldn't afford anymore. And when he looked up, he saw me. This time, I didn't hide. I walked straight to his table and sat across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavier than any words. Finally, he whispered, his voice broken. "Why?" I leaned in, close enough for him to see the fire in my eyes. "Because you called me disposable." His mouth opened, but no words came out. Just silence, defeat. For the first time, he didn't look like a boss. He didn't look like a man. He looked like nothing, and that was when I knew it was over. The empire was gone. The family was gone. His pride was gone. All that remained was the hollow shell of a man who once thought himself untouchable. And me, the ghost he created. The shadow he underestimated. The disposable servant who had become his executioner. But as I walked away from that bar, a thought lingered in my mind. I had destroyed him, completely, and yet. I wondered if, in the process, I had destroyed something in myself too. Because once you taste revenge, once you breathe it, once you let it guide every step, you realize you're no longer the same person you were before. And maybe that's what he wanted all along. Some people think revenge ends when the enemy falls, that once they're stripped of everything, the fire dies out. But that's a lie, because revenge doesn't end with their collapse. It ends with your choice, whether to walk away or to crush what little is left, and I wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. By now, he was nothing more than a ghost of his former self. His company was gone, seized and gutted. His fortune frozen, drained by lawsuits and penalties. His wife had filed for divorce. His son had disowned him in front of the entire world, but he was still breathing, and to me, that was unfinished business. I started watching him again. Not from the shadows this time, but up close. He had moved into a dingy apartment on the edge of the city. The man who once slept on Egyptian cotton sheets now lived among peeling paint and flickering light bulbs. I saw him leave in the mornings, shoulders slumped, looking for jobs far beneath him. Bartending, warehouse shifts, anything that would keep the lights on. He rarely got hired. No one wanted him anymore. His name was Poison, and every night he returned to that apartment with another rejection on his face. That should have been enough for me. But it wasn't, because the ghost of his words still echoed in my head. People like you are disposable. I couldn't let it end with him surviving, so I pushed further. One night, I slipped an envelope under his door. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No threats, no explanation. Just a question. Do you feel disposable now? The next morning, I waited outside, hidden in the shadows. I watched him pick it up, read it, and crumble to the floor. He stayed there for minutes, clutching the paper, shaking like a man who had finally seen his executioner's face. For days afterward, he barely left his apartment. The mighty king had become a prisoner of fear. But I wasn't done tormenting him. Not yet. I began leaving reminders everywhere. A note slipped into his mailbox. A single word, disposable, scrawled on his bathroom mirror in condensation. A photograph of him from his glory days taped to his apartment door, with the words, "This was never you." He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. He was unraveling completely, and I watched, night after night, waiting for the moment when the final thread would snap. It came sooner than I expected. One night, he staggered out of his building around midnight, bottle in hand, stumbling toward the bridge on the river's edge. I followed silently, every step heavy with the weight of what I had done. He leaned against the railing, staring into the dark water below. For the first time, I saw not a villain, not a tyrant, not even my enemy. I saw a broken man, and I'll admit something I never thought I'd feel. Pity. Because in that moment, I realized the truth. Revenge hadn't just destroyed him. It had destroyed me too. I walked closer, my footsteps echoing across the empty bridge. He turned, eyes wide, and when he saw me, he knew. He didn't ask how or why. He didn't need to. He just whispered, "It was you." And I nodded. "Yes," I said. It was always me. His eyes filled with something I had never seen in him before. Not arrogance, not rage, not even hatred, regret. "Why didn't you just kill me?" he asked. His voice cracked like a child's. I looked at him for a long time, then answered with the only truth left in me. Because death would have been mercy. He stared at me for another moment, then back at the river. His body shook, his knuckles white against the railing, and then, without another word, he climbed up. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched. And when he finally let go, when his body fell into the black water below, I felt nothing. No victory. No satisfaction. No joy, just emptiness because I had won. But at what cost? The disposable man had destroyed the king, and in the end, I realized we were both disposable after all. The splash still echoes in my mind. The sound of his body hitting the river. The silence that followed. I thought it would be the end, but endings are never that simple. The police pulled his body out the next morning. The news called it a tragedy. Reporters who once devoured his downfall now feasted on his death, spinning stories about mental health, corporate pressure, the cost of ambition. They painted him as a victim, a man broken by the system, not the tyrant who exploited everyone around him. Not the hypocrite who called me disposable. No, in death, they made him a martyr, and that was the twist I hadn't expected, because I hadn't just killed him. I had resurrected him, reborn in the public's eyes as a tragic figure instead of the monster he truly was. And suddenly my victory felt poisoned. For weeks, I couldn't escape his name. His face was on every screen again. Memorials, interviews, candlelight vigils. Old colleagues cried on camera, pretending they hadn't hated him. Former employees praised his leadership. They rewrote history in front of me. The world forgot the scandals, the corruption, the betrayals. All they remembered was the end. His death overshadowed his sins, and I was left wondering if, in destroying him, I had given him the one thing he never deserved: redemption. But the truth has a way of clawing back to the surface, and I still had my insurance folder, so I made a decision. If the world wanted to turn him into a saint, I would remind them of the devil they buried. I released everything, every file, every recording, every hidden document that proved who he really was. Bribes, lies, fraud, exploitation, abuse. I didn't just leak it to the press this time. I dumped it online everywhere. A tidal wave of truth no one could contain, and within hours, the narrative flipped. The martyr became a monster again. The tributes turned into curses. The vigils turned into protests. His name was dragged through the dirt one final time, and I watched it all unfold with a strange calmness, like I was outside of myself, like it wasn't me who had set this fire. But fire doesn't stop at the target. It spreads, and soon the questions started. Who leaked the files? Who had been behind his downfall all along? Rumors swirled. Some said it was a competitor. Others said it was the government. A few even whispered it had been an inside job, someone close to him. No one looked at me. And yet, every time I saw my reflection in the mirror, I saw the shadow of what I'd become, the disposable man who had proved he mattered by destroying everything. I thought I would feel free. Instead, I felt chained to him more tightly than ever, because revenge doesn't end when your enemy falls. It ends when you let go. And I hadn't let go. One night, I returned to the river. The same bridge. The same black water. I leaned against the railing where he had stood, staring down into the current that had swallowed him, and I asked myself the question I had been avoiding since the beginning. What had I really won? I had no fortune, no empire, no recognition, just a hollow victory. Because when you strip away the fire, the planning, the satisfaction of revenge, what remains? Nothing. I realized I wasn't the victor. I was just another casualty of his cruelty. He had called me disposable. And in proving him wrong, I had become exactly that. Disposable to myself, my future, my soul. The city moved on. His story faded. New scandals replaced his headlines. But I couldn't move on. Because revenge doesn't just take your enemy's life. It takes yours too. Piece by piece. Until one day, you wake up and realize the person you were before, the one who still believed in loyalty, in justice, in meaning, that person is gone. And what's left is nothing but a shadow, my shadow, his shadow, forever entwined. The river whispered to me that night. Its current carried more than water. It carried the weight of 10 years of loyalty, betrayal, and blood. I had come here to face the truth, to stand where my boss had stood, to finally put an end to this chain between us. But as I stared into the black water, I realized something horrifying. I hadn't destroyed him. He had destroyed me. I spent years believing revenge would heal me, that bringing him down would restore everything he stole, my dignity, my future, my worth. But revenge doesn't give back what was lost. It just burns everything left. The man who called me disposable was gone, but his words lived on, carved into my soul. Every step I took, every night I lay awake, I heard them echo, disposable, disposable, disposable. And maybe he was right all along. Because in killing him, I had killed myself too. The world had moved on without him. His name was fading from the headlines. The files I released were buried under the next scandal. The next outrage. People didn't care anymore. But I cared. Because while his story was ending, mine had frozen in place the night he called me worthless. I had lived every second since then in service to one thing, his destruction. And now that it was done, there was nothing left for me, no life, no future. Just emptiness. I gripped the cold railing, knuckles white, breath sharp against the midnight air. And for the first time in years, I laughed. It was ugly, broken, hollow, because I finally understood the real twist of this story. He hadn't lost everything. I had. I had become the very thing I swore I wasn't. Disposable. The water waited below, endless, black, silent. It didn't judge. It didn't betray. It simply took what was given to it. I leaned forward, feeling gravity tug at me like invisible hands. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with release. Because for the first time, I wasn't thinking about him, I was thinking about peace. I closed my eyes and whispered into the night. After 10 years of loyalty, you called me disposable. But in the end, you were wrong. I let go. The wind rushed past me, the water rose to meet me, and in that final instant, I wasn't disposable. I was free.